Chapter 1. The call and the mirror. You feel it, don't you? That invisible weight pressing against your chest when you walk into crowded spaces. The peculiar loneliness that intensifies even when surrounded by people who claim to love you. This is not paranoia, chosen one. This is the first whisper of what I spent my entire career attempting to articulate, the burden of carrying consciousness in an unconscious world. You are experiencing what I term differentiation, the psychological separation from the collective mind that marks the beginning of true individuation. In my years of clinical practice, I observed a particular type of patient who defied conventional diagnosis. They appeared successful by societal standards, yet they suffered from a nameless dread, a persistent feeling of being fundamentally wrong for this world. The American culture you inhabit, with its relentless emphasis on productivity, its worship of the persona, its terror of stillness, creates the perfect incubator for this soul sickness. You have been taught to measure your worth by external validation, to construct an identity from borrowed parts, to silence the inner voice that whispers of deeper truths. And now that voice has become a roar you can no longer ignore. The isolation you experience is not evidence of your failure. It is evidence of your evolution. When the psyche begins the sacred work of integration, it must first create distance from collective infection. Think of it as a psychological immune response. Your unconscious mind recognizing that the values, beliefs, and relationships surrounding you are toxic to your emerging self. Most humans never develop this discernment. They remain embedded in mass consciousness, living out scripts written by culture, family lineage, and archetypal possession without ever questioning the author. But you questioned. And that question, who am I beneath these masks, initiated the alchemical process that is now fundamentally restructuring your inner world. Let me be direct about something critical. The confusion you feel about your purpose. The frustration that you cannot seem to manifest, like the spiritual influences promise, the guilt about your sensitivity, these are not obstacles to your path. They are the path itself. The American spiritual marketplace has bastardized ancient wisdom into a transactional model. Think positive thoughts, raise your vibration, and the universe will deliver material rewards. This is psychological imperialism dressed in Sanskrit terminology. It bypasses the most essential work, the descent into the unconscious, the confrontation with the shadow, the integration of the disowned self. You cannot ascend until you have descended. This is the law of the psyche, as immutable as gravity. The kingdom you seek entry to is not located in some celestial realm accessible through enough meditation or crystals. It exists in the depths of your own unconscious mind, guarded by the very fears, traumas, and shadow aspects you have spent a lifetime avoiding. This is why I mapped out a psychological framework specifically for those of you carrying this burden of premature awakening. The 3 keys to a prosperous life is not another self-help manual promising easy transformation. It is a trilogy, an ebook and audiobook collection that serves as a practical map for navigating the specific trials that chosen ones face when attempting to integrate spiritual awareness into American pragmatic reality. I designed it for those of you who feel the call to something greater but find yourselves sabotaging every attempt at material stability, those who sense your power but collapse under the weight of worthiness wounds, those who know they are meant for impact but cannot seem to escape cycles of isolation and misunderstanding. The link is waiting for you in the description below, and I mention it now, not as salesmanship, but as a genuine offering to a fellow traveler who needs a lantern in the darkness. Now, let us return to the mechanics of what is happening within your psyche. The clearance you sense, this growing awareness that you operate under different laws than others, is the emergence of what I called the transcendent function. This is the psyche's innate capacity to hold paradox, to reconcile opposites, to navigate between the conscious and unconscious realms with increasing fluidity. It develops only through suffering, only through the experience of being broken open by life, of having your carefully constructed identity shattered, of sitting in the rubble of who you thought you were. Does the psyche build this bridge between worlds? Your sensitivity is not a curse. It is the evidence that this bridge has been constructed. You feel the emotional undercurrents in rooms because your psyche has learned to read symbolic language, the language of the unconscious. When someone speaks words of kindness while radiating hostility, you feel the discord. When a situation appears beneficial on the surface but carries a dangerous energetic signature, you know to retreat. This is not supernatural perception. This is what happens when a psyche has been forced through enough trials that it can no longer afford to live at the surface level of consciousness. Most people navigate life through the persona, the mask we wear for social acceptance. They make decisions based on what will preserve belonging, what will maintain the carefully curated image they present to the world. But you, chosen one, have had this option systematically destroyed. Every friendship that dissolved, every job that ended inexplicably, every romantic relationship that crumbled despite your best efforts, these were not random misfortunes. They were the psyche's ruthless campaign to dismantle your persona so the authentic self could emerge. The American emphasis on individualism paradoxically creates the most conformist society I have ever studied. You are told to be yourself while being punished for any deviation from narrow acceptable parameters. You are encouraged to follow your dreams while being economically coerced into soul-destroying labor. This double bind creates massive psychological splitting, a fragmentation between the public self and the private self, between the aspirational image and the lived reality. For most, this split remains manageable through various forms of numbing, consumption, entertainment, substance use, compulsive productivity. But for you, the split became unbearable. Something in your constitution, perhaps a more sensitive nervous system, perhaps an old soul's memory of integration, perhaps simply a refusal to accept the lie, made you incompatible with this fragmented existence. And so the psyche initiated the individuation journey, whether you consciously agreed or not. Chapter 2. The shadow work and resistance. The resistance you feel toward your own power is not humility. Let me be absolutely clear about this distinction, because the spiritual community has weaponized humility into a tool of self-suppression. True humility is standing in right relationship to the self, recognizing that you are a vessel for something larger while honoring the responsibility that comes with that role. False humility is the ego's cunning strategy to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of being fully seen. When I speak of the shadow, I'm not referring to some abstract concept of evil or darkness. I'm speaking about the psychological repository of everything you have been taught to reject about yourself. In American culture particularly, this includes anger that challenges authority, grief that disrupts productivity, sexuality that defies Puritan restraints, ambition in women, softness in men, the need for rest, the desire for pleasure, the acknowledgement of envy, the expression of full human complexity. You have been conditioned since childhood to exile these aspects of yourself into the unconscious. Your family needed you to be the good child, the responsible one, the one who didn't make waves. Your educational system needed you to be compliant, measurable, standardized. Your religious or spiritual community needed you to transcend your humanity, to live in the higher chakras, to bypass your animal nature in pursuit of enlightenment. Your romantic partners needed you to fulfill their projections, the savior, the caretaker, the mirror for their own disowned power. And so you learned to perform. You became extraordinarily skilled at reading what each environment required and morphing yourself to meet that requirement. This is not conscious manipulation. It is survival strategy for a sensitive soul in an unconscious world. But there is a cost. With each act of self-abandonment, with each silencing of your authentic response, you deposit another fragment of your true self into the shadow. Now you stand at a threshold where the shadow has grown so massive, so potent with unlived life, that it can no longer be contained. It erupts in symptoms, the rage that explodes over minor frustrations, the depression that has no rational cause, the anxiety that keeps you frozen when opportunities arise, the self-sabotage that destroys every attempt at success right before the breakthrough. These are not character flaws. These are the shadow's desperate attempts to get your attention, to reclaim the energy you have invested in maintaining a false self. The psyche is not interested in your comfort. It is interested in your wholeness, and it will create whatever suffering is necessary to force the integration that you keep avoiding. Let me take you deeper into the specific mechanics of how this manifests for chosen ones. You carry what I termed a negative mother complex or negative father complex, internalized voices that tell you that you are fundamentally unworthy of receiving. This is not necessarily because your actual parents were abusive, though they may have been. It emerges from the archetypal wound of being a sensitive soul born into a culture that does not recognize sensitivity as strength. The negative mother complex manifests as the inner voice that says, "Who do you think you are to want more? You should be grateful for what you have. Your desires are selfish. You don't deserve abundance because you haven't suffered enough yet." This voice often sounds loving, even protective. It frames self-denial as virtue, martyrdom as spiritual advancement. But underneath, it is the psyche's attempt to keep you small, to protect you from the imagined danger of being fully visible. The negative father complex manifests as the inner voice that says, "You will never be enough. Your work is inadequate. Others are doing it better. You need more credentials, more proof, more external validation before you can claim your authority." This voice drives compulsive achievement while simultaneously ensuring you never feel satisfied with your accomplishments. It is the internalized patriarchal demand for perfection, for measurable results, for constant productivity. Both of these complexes operate as autonomous entities within the psyche. They have their own energy, their own voice, their own agenda separate from your conscious will. This is why positive thinking fails. You cannot simply override these complexes with affirmations. They are too deeply rooted in your psychological structure, too connected to early survival strategies, too invested in maintaining the status quo. The only path through is confrontation. You must learn to identify these voices as not you. You must develop the capacity to observe them without being possessed by them. This requires what I called active imagination, a dialogue between your conscious ego and these unconscious contents. You must ask the negative mother complex, "What are you protecting me from?" You must ask the negative father complex, "What do you fear will happen if I claim my power?" The answers will surprise you. Often these complexes are not the enemy. They are traumatized protectors trying to save you from the annihilation they believe will come if you step fully into your light. The negative mother complex may reveal that it fears you will be destroyed by envy if you become too successful, that you will lose love if you stop caretaking, that you will be abandoned if you set boundaries. The negative father complex may reveal that it fears you will be humiliated by failure, that you will be exposed as a fraud, that you will lose control if you stop performing. These fears are not irrational. They are based on real experiences, moments in your early life when you were punished for shining, rejected for your sensitivity, shamed for your needs. The psyche stores these memories in the body, in the nervous system, in the unconscious, And until they are brought into conscious awareness and metabolized, they will continue to run your life from the shadows. This is the alchemical work, chosen one. Not transcendence, but integration. Not spiritual bypassing, but psychological digestion. You must be willing to feel the unfelt feelings, to grieve the unlived life, to rage at the injustices done to your tender soul. You must allow the shadow to speak its truth without immediately silencing it with spiritual platitudes. I watched countless patients resist this work because it feels like regression. They would say, "But I've already forgiven my parents. I've already processed that trauma. Why is it coming up again?" And died. And I would explain, the psyche works in layers. Each new level of consciousness reveals deeper strata of wounding that were previously inaccessible. You cannot metabolize trauma until your nervous system is regulated enough to handle the activation. You cannot integrate the shadow until your ego is strong enough to withstand the truth of your own complexity. This is why your isolation served a sacred function. It removed you from the constant demand to perform, to manage others' projections, to maintain the persona. It gave your psyche the space it needed to begin the dismantling process. Every friendship that dissolved, every opportunity that evaporated, every door that closed, these were the universe's way of protecting your transformation. You could not have done this inner work while maintaining your external commitments. The energy required for individuation is total. It demands everything. But here is the paradox that most spiritual teachers miss. The work of integration is not about becoming more spiritual. It is about becoming more human. It is about reclaiming the rage you were taught to suppress, the grief you were told to get over, the desire you were shamed for having, the ambition you were warned would corrupt you. It is about bringing all of these exiled parts home and discovering that they are not demons. They are sources of power waiting to be harnessed for your sacred work. The chosen ones I have worked with carry a particular brand of guilt around their power. They sense their capacity for influence, for leadership, for visibility, but they immediately collapse under the weight of unworthiness. They think, if I were truly spiritual, I wouldn't want recognition. If I were truly evolved, I wouldn't care about money. If I were truly awakened, I would be content with nothing. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding of how the psyche works. The self, the totality of your being, includes both the transcendent and the immanent, both the spiritual and the material, both the giving and the receiving. To deny one pole in pursuit of the other is to create the very split that generates neurosis. You cannot give from an empty cup. You cannot serve the collective if you are drowning in scarcity. You cannot hold space for others' transformation if you have not claimed your own authority. The resistance to receiving is often the last and most stubborn defense against wholeness. It masquerades as selflessness, as service, as devotion to a higher purpose, but underneath it is terror. Terror of being seen in your full power, terror of outgrowing the people who kept you safe, terror of the responsibility that comes with claiming your birthright, terror of the envy you will evoke, the criticism you will face, the inevitable loneliness of standing in your truth. So you stay small. You sabotage success right before the breakthrough. You collapse into illness when visibility approaches. You create chaos in your life to justify why you cannot step forward. And all the while, the unlived life accumulates in the shadow, growing more desperate, more destructive, demanding to be lived. Chapter 3. Synchronicities and the language of the universe. Now we arrive at the phenomenon that first alerted me to the existence of a reality beyond the purely material. Synchronicity, the causal connecting principle that governs the relationship between psyche and matter. You have been experiencing this with increasing frequency, have you not? The repeating numbers that appear precisely when you are contemplating a significant decision. The chance encounter with a stranger who speaks the exact words you needed to hear. The book that falls open to the page containing the answer to your unspoken question. The dream that predicts tomorrow's events with unsettling accuracy. The rationalist mind dismisses these as coincidence, as confirmation bias, as the brain's pattern-seeking mechanism misfiring. But you know better. You have felt the numinous quality of these moments, the unmistakable sense that intelligence beyond your conscious awareness is orchestrating events for your development. This is not mysticism. It is the psyche's natural mode of communication when the barrier between conscious and unconscious begins to dissolve. Synchronicity operates according to a principle fundamentally different from causality. Causality states that A causes B through a chain of mechanical events. Synchronicity reveals that A and B can be meaningfully connected without any causal relationship, linked instead through the underlying field of the collective unconscious, what modern physics might call the quantum field, what ancient mystics called the Akashic records, what I understood as the psychoid layer, where psyche and matter are one. You access this layer not through intellectual understanding, but through symbolic consciousness. When you stop interpreting the world literally and begin reading it as a living symbol system, you discover that reality is speaking to you constantly. The black crow that appears when you are contemplating endings, the unexpected rain that comes when you are processing grief, the technology that malfunctions when you are avoiding a truth. These are not random events. They are the universe's way of confirming that your inner process has outer correspondence. But here is where most people misapply this knowledge. They begin treating synchronicity as a cosmic vending machine. They demand signs, they test the universe, they try to manipulate outcomes through magical thinking. This is ego inflation, the dangerous confusion between the limited conscious mind and the vastness of the self. Synchronicity does not respond to demands. It emerges organically when you are aligned with your authentic path, when the ego has surrendered control enough to allow the self to lead. The repeating numbers, particularly sequences like 11, 11, 3, 33, 4, 44, have become ubiquitous in the spiritual community, often with elaborate numerological interpretations attached. I will tell you the deeper psychological truth. These numbers are not messages from angels or ascended masters. They are your own psyche's way of getting your attention, of saying, you are on threshold, you are between worlds. Pay attention to what you are thinking and feeling in this moment, because it contains important information. The unconscious communicates through symbols because it operates in a language prior to words. Numbers are archetypal symbols. They represent universal patterns of organization. When you notice repeating numbers, your unconscious is highlighting a moment of synchronistic significance, a point where your inner state and outer circumstances are resonating at the same frequency. What matters is not the specific number, but your response. Do you pause and become present? Do you notice what you were just thinking about? Do you honor the moment as sacred? This is the practice of active attention, the cultivation of a contemplative relationship with your daily experience. You begin to live symbolically rather than literally. You ask not, what does this mean? But what is my psyche trying to tell me through this experience? You start to notice patterns, the same challenge appearing in different forms, the same character archetype showing up in various relationships, the same emotional trigger activated by seemingly unrelated events. Let me illustrate with the pattern I observe most frequently in my practice, the phenomenon of the divine blockage. A patient would describe how they were on the verge of a major breakthrough, a job opportunity, a relationship, a creative project, and then, inexplicably, obstacles would arise. The funding would fall through, the person would ghost them, the project would collapse, and they would interpret this as evidence that they were being punished. that they did not deserve success, that the universe was against them. But when we examined the symbolic dimension, a different truth emerged. In every case, the blockage occurred precisely at the moment when the patient was about to commit to something that would betray their authentic self, the prestigious job that would require them to abandon their creative calling, the relationship with someone who needed them to stay small, the project that would cement them in an identity they had outgrown. The psyche created the obstacle to protect the individuation process. This is the truth about divine timing that the manifestation teachers miss. Delays are not always punishment. Often they are protection. The door closes because you are not yet ready to walk through it without losing yourself. The relationship ends because staying would require you to abandon parts of yourself that need to be integrated. The opportunity dissolves because accepting it would take you further from your authentic path, not closer to it. But the ego experiences this as suffering because it operates on a different timeline than the self. The ego wants comfort now, validation now, success now. It cannot perceive the larger arc of your development, the intricate way that every apparent setback is positioning you for a breakthrough that your current consciousness cannot yet imagine. This is why surrender is not passive resignation. It is active trust in the intelligence of the psyche. Now, let us examine the phenomenon of prophetic dreaming, which many of you are experiencing with disturbing regularity. You dream of events that later occur. You dream of people before you meet them. You dream of dangers that materialize. You dream in symbols that later prove to be literal predictions. The modern psychological establishment dismisses this as coincidence or memory distortion, but I documented too many cases of verified precognition to accept this explanation. The unconscious exists outside of linear time. It has access to information that the conscious mind, bound by temporal sequencing, cannot perceive. This is not supernatural. It is the natural function of a psyche that has developed depth perception. Just as your eyes create three-dimensional vision by integrating two slightly different perspectives, your psyche can perceive temporal depth when the conscious and unconscious work in collaboration. Prophetic dreams emerge when the barrier between these two modes of consciousness becomes permeable, usually during the individuation process, when massive amounts of unconscious content are being integrated. The dreams are not glimpses of a fixed future, but rather readings of the probability field based on current trajectories. They show you where your life is heading if you continue on your present course, which gives you the opportunity to make different choices if the destination does not serve your wholeness. But here is the disturbing truth that most are not ready to hear. Not all synchronicities and prophetic insights are benevolent. The unconscious contains not only the wise self, but also destructive complexes, ancestral traumas, and what I called the shadow of the collective, the accumulated darkness of human history. When you open to the symbolic realm without proper discernment, you can become possessed by forces that do not have your well-being at heart. This is what happens in many cases of so-called spiritual awakening that end in psychological crisis. The person has a genuine opening to the unconscious. They begin experiencing synchronicities and downloads, and they interpret this as evidence that they are specially chosen, that they have unique access to divine truth. The ego inflates to contain the experience, and they lose the capacity to discern between the wisdom of the self and the seductions of grandiosity. They start believing they are a prophet, a messiah, a channel for absolute truth. They make reckless decisions based on divine guidance that is actually the voice of an unintegrated complex. They push away anyone who questions their perceptions, surrounding themselves with followers who mirror their inflation back to them. I watched this pattern destroy many promising individuals because they lacked the psychological foundation to metabolize the experiences flooding their consciousness. This is why I insisted that individuation requires ego strength, not ego dissolution. You need a stable sense of self, a capacity for critical thinking, a willingness to question your own perceptions in order to navigate the symbolic realm safely. The goal is not to merge with the unconscious, but to establish a conscious relationship with it, a dialogue where the ego maintains its discriminating function while remaining open to influences from the deeper psyche. The discernment required is subtle. How do you know if an intuitive hit is coming from the self or from a complex? How do you distinguish between genuine synchronicity and confirmation bias? How do you tell the difference between divine guidance and wishful thinking? These are the questions that separate genuine individuation from spiritual inflation. The self has a particular quality. It is paradoxical, humbling, and usually asks you to do the harder thing. It does not promise easy success or immediate gratification. It does not confirm your existing biases or tell you that you are special in the way the ego wants to be special. It reveals truths that challenge your self-concept, that require you to sacrifice comfort for growth, that lead you into the unknown rather than back to the familiar. A complex, by contrast, has an addictive quality. It tells you what you want to hear. It confirms your victimhood or your superiority. It provides simple explanations for complex situations. It promises that everything will be better once you get rid of the toxic people, situations, patterns. It creates drama and urgency. It demands immediate action without reflection. It cannot tolerate being questioned. You develop this discernment through practice, through learning to observe your own psychological processes with compassionate detachment. You notice when you are possessed by a complex because you lose perspective. Everything becomes absolute, black and white, life or death. You notice when you're aligned with the self because you feel centered even in uncertainty, capable of holding paradox, connected to something larger than your personal agenda. This brings us to another crucial pattern I must illuminate: the phenomenon of isolative preparation that so many chosen ones misinterpret as punishment. You have been removed from normal social circulation for extended periods. Your friendships have dissolved. Your romantic relationships have ended or never materialized. Your family may have rejected or misunderstood you. You spend vast amounts of time alone, often feeling that you are wasting your life, that you should be out there doing something productive, connecting with people, building a conventional existence. But the psyche knows what the ego cannot accept. You are being incubated. The isolation is not exile, it is initiation. You are being held in a container where the normal defenses cannot operate, where the persona cannot be maintained, where you are forced to encounter the raw contents of your own psyche without the numbing effects of social